Hello, hello. Welcome to Three Skulls Tavern. I'm your host, Matt, and this is a bit of a last minute stream that I've decided to put together. So, um, apologies that it's not necessary. Well, it's not going to be, it's not pre recorded, it's not going to be edited. So, there may be some silences that aren't cut out, etc. But I thought it was important to try and get this out because the Book of Beasts expansion for Forbidden Lands has just been released to Kickstarter backers, and yeah, there's a chapter with the solo rules for Forbidden Lands in them, which I've written, and I'm chuckling because I wasn't aware that they were going to be coming out already, and yeah, I would have been. I'm just a little bit feel like I'm a little bit on my back foot. I would have liked to have had something prepared. I would have liked to have had something pre-recorded. I thought there would be another draft of I would be asked to do another draft of these rules before they would have been shown as well. So I was not expecting these to be shown, especially as they are right now. Yeah, to the Kickstarter public, so to speak. So, but they're out there. That's cool. They have been tested. This was the first draft sent to Free League, but it is version 6 that has gone through internal playtesting, both myself at the table and with a group of about 10 playtesters. I think 8 in total, maybe a couple more. Yeah, so it has been playtested pretty intensely over the course of we started playtesting it back, I think, in July or August of last year. So this project has been going for quite a long time. Anyway, it's out. It's here. We're going to be taking a look at it in a second. The other thing this has been a bit of a strange week. In fact, a strange 2 days, because yesterday the Book of Beasts beta came out, and today the Blade Runner early access PDFs came out, and yeah, I've been trying to focus on thinking about what I'm going to be talking about with my solo rules, but of course I have no idea what's going to be in Blade Runner. It's the new shiny, it's the new game by Free League. I'm very excited. I really want to dive into it and have a look at it, but I've been trying very, very hard not to look at it. I've succeeded so far, but of course I'm on social media and a lot of people are talking about it already. So it's been a little bit distracting, but we're here to talk about Forbidden Lands. We're here to talk about the solo rules. So yeah, this stream is going to be a little bit of me walking through the solo rules, kind of giving you a, I guess, like a dev diary or a dev walkthrough, a dev tutorial on a little look behind the curtain at maybe why certain things have been done in the way they have. And yeah, I'm also going to be collecting questions from the chat as we go, and I'll be answering them. I'll be trying to answer them. I'm hoping to have like a Q&A section at the end of this stream where I can basically go through and ask some of them. But I will be keeping an eye on the chat, and if it's possible to squeeze a few questions in where it kind of makes sense contextually, then I will too. Right. Before we do jump in, I guess one thing to talk about is people have had different expectations what we're going to, what these solo rules would entail. I had to work to a brief. There were very specific, I don't know what you would call them, constraints, I guess, that Free League gave me, that, how they wanted the rules to look. And I guess they won't be upset if I talk about a few of them that are just kind of go towards explaining why they look the way they do. First, let me say I have actually done an entire mini campaign for Forbidden Lands solo on my channel. I use the rules, the solo rules called Forbidden Hero, which you can find on DriveThruRPG. And they're a good set of rules. They work, but Free League wanted to do their own official set. So what they asked for was... Oh, in fact, let me take it back a step. A game that came out before this Kickstarter happened was Twilight 2000. And in Twilight 2000, Free League had included a set of solo rules. These were unlocked in the Kickstarter for Twilight 2000. In fact, it's the first time Free League had added solo rules as a stretch goal for any of their Kickstarters. So I didn't write those solo rules. Someone else wrote those solo rules. And when they came out, They were received quite well. I think I've also used them in a co-op game on this channel. I quite like them. In fact, I really like them because they're playing card based, and I'm a playing card nut. I used to collect like art editions of, like, fancy editions of playing cards. I have probably about, I don't have a ridiculous number, but I probably have about 30, maybe 40 decks of playing cards in my house. So I really like playing cards. I like tarot cards as well a lot. And one of the nice things about Twilight 2000 is that the oracles and things are playing card based. That worked really well for Twilight 2000 because it had a normal standard deck of playing cards also for like the random encounters and things. So it's kind of a no-brainer, I think, to include that in the solo rules. And because Free League had already published this set of solo rules, one of the constraints they gave me for this project was they wanted the Forbidden Lands solo rules to be similar to the Twilight 2000 ones. They wanted me to use the Twilight 2000 rule set as a basis. That way there is a bit of consistency. There's a sense of things kind of fitting together quite well between the two sets of rules. Sets of solo rules, that is. And in fact, if you look at Twilight 2000, there are a lot of shared themes between it and Forbidden Lands. It's basically a post-apocalyptic hex crawl, both of the games. And yeah, and so the kind of the procedure for how you explore is not that different between the two games. Yeah, so it's kind of was a normal place you would expect to start looking at things, and I was more than happy to do it because I really like the playing card kind of based element of it, and yeah, and I've got a lot of experience with Forbidden Lands. I got a lot of experience with solo play with both of the systems, so I was happy to get stuck in. So that's a little bit of history. That's the first constraint, was it needed to look like Twilight 2000 solo rules. The second constraint was a word count. And basically, I'm not going to say what it was, but effectively, they wanted to include it as a sort of appendix at the back of the Book of Beasts, which is where we're seeing it right now. Just like the solo rules for Twilight 2000 were included as an appendix at the back of the referee's manual. So I was not given carte blanche to just basically write make the perfect set of solo rules for Forbidden Lands where word count is no problem. I had a constraint with how many words I was allowed to do. And I have to say, the first draft I wrote was double the word limit. And that was before I started populating things like some of the random tables and things. So I quickly found that the word limit was an issue, and I needed to be quite strict on what I was going to include and what I was going to take out. So that's why there aren't necessarily more tables of things that you might want to see in them. Yeah, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but one nice thing about Forbidden Lands is that it's one of the titles that's included in Free League's workshop. That means I am kind of hoping to do a official solo expansion document if I get the time, which will basically provide some additional tables and potentially some additional rules. The things, basically, consider it like a director's cut of a movie, maybe, where it's kind of like, we're called the author's cut, editing cut, where I might be adding some bits back in that I would have liked to have put originally in it, but I didn't have the word count to do. And that's something I would like to do. I have no idea when I'm going to have the time to do it, but yeah. That's just the second constraint I wanted to talk around, the word count, that kind of limit I had to work with. And I'll stop there. Those are the kind of the two main constraints I wanted to explain, because they explain, I think, go a long way towards explaining why the solo rules look the way they do, why they aren't necessarily longer, why they're using playing cards, why why they're not using dice more, etc. It's very much following on from Twilight 2000. Okay. So let's get the PDF up on the screen. Basically, before I start going through, I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat. You can see here I've got the chat up on the side of the screen, so people don't have to necessarily, open the live chat on the side. This is mainly for after the video has been recorded and it goes live, people want to watch it after this live stream is finished. It's just a bit easier to see everything in one place on the screen. So very quickly, Magnus is asking, did I pitch this or did Free League contact me? I'm struggling to remember. I've got 3 different Free League commissions on the go right now, and they all worked a little bit differently. I think I contacted Free League about this when the stretch goal went up on the Kickstarter. I think I contacted them and said, hey, if you're looking for somebody, I would love to do this. I think that's how this one happened. So I contacted them. I already have a working relationship with Free League as well. I know some of the chaps there. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. Roland's also saying that he's heard that I'm going to be doing the solo rules for Vasen as well. I am. I've actually started working on them. Magnus asking what was the biggest challenge. I'll save that one for the end. That's probably one to talk. I'll probably be talking about that as I go, but something to think about at the end of the stream. Yeah. Tibor's asking, is it a book or is it software? It's a PDF. It's an appendix at the back of the Book of Beasts. And the Book of Beasts is going to be printed, so it's going to be printed in the back of the Book of Beasts. I don't know when it's going to be available for the general public, but for now it is only available. It's the beta for the Book of Beasts is out for Kickstarter backers first. Yeah, so I don't know when it's going to be out. That's nothing that I have any decision-making power over. One thing about software, Foundry, there was a Foundry virtual tabletop implementation of the Book of Beasts that was unlocked as a stretch goal for that Kickstarter. But the solo rules were the last stretch goal. So I'm not 100% sure whether some of the things in the solo rules are going to be implemented into that module. I don't know if a mediocre dad is here on the who's the Foundry dev for Forbidden Lands is here on the stream. If you are, why don't you give us a shout, please? But on Discord, he did say that he was curious to know whether they were going to be included in Foundry, which makes it sound like he's not been contacted yet to start working on them. Okay, I think I'm just going to crack in. Yeah, all right. So, here you can see up on the screen the solo rules, and effectively there's a little blurb here at the beginning, and the main thing which was bold text in my Google Doc manuscript of this was this bit here. You will need a standard deck of playing cards with the jokers removed. So this is playing card focused with the jokers taken out. Very important. You're not going to get very far with these, with this set of rules without a deck of cards. Okay. Now, talking about the first section here is about creating your solo adventure. So how to tweak your character for playing solo in the Forbidden Lands. So the Forbidden Lands is a very, very deadly game. So there are definitely tweaks that need to be made. And really, you can see here, there's not a lot that I've said needed to be tweaked here other than basically beefing up your PC. That's giving them one extra general talent where I recommend it's Lucky. Lucky is the one that lets you roll twice. If you get a critical injury and you take the lower result, which means you're much less likely to suffer an instant death. And you get 2 extra skill points to distribute. So you're just a little bit more skilled, and you get you're a little bit more capable as well. And yeah. And really the thing about armor and starting funds is basically something a GM should do really at the start of any game anyway, which is, if you've created your character, you've got some silver, you've got some equipment, and if you want to sell some of that equipment to swap it for something else, absolutely fine, go for it. That's just me kind of like, people probably do that anyway. I don't really think it needs to be said necessarily, but I put it in there anyway. And I've also recommended to purchase some armor. Armor is pretty important. It's one extra thing that can help to keep you alive, so highly recommended. And then start talking about companions. And for me, like when I ran my solo game on the channel, I ran it with a companion. When I did playtesting, I ran it with a companion. I also ran it once without a companion, and it's just... yeah, it's just a deadly game, really. And I think a companion, I highly recommend playing this with a companion. Now, especially when you're starting off and you're player character isn't very experienced, doesn't have a lot of like cool talents and stuff, once you start getting a little bit more awesome, you're not necessarily going to need a companion so much. But a companion's going to be able to help in a number of ways. I mean, you could have like a mount, like a horse, something like that, that could take some equipment for you to help lessen the burden of being over encumbered. But really, a companion is there to give you a little bit of a bonus on certain roles where you would normally have different players in a group with different strengths being able to handle different challenges with better than average odds, if that makes sense. So the companion is there really to be able to give you a bit of a boost. So I definitely put a section here about companions. I really highly recommend using them, although of course it is optional. And when I was thinking about companions, I was trying to think about how to have companions, be listed in a way that they weren't just played as a second PC. I think that's really important. And I've written them in such a way that that's the case. You basically have an NPC who's tagging along, who has some full stats. Like they do have their attributes and their skills. They're all ranked up. But one thing they don't have is they don't have willpower points. They can't push their rolls. And I've kind of said they should rarely roll for themselves, instead giving a help die or two, I guess you could say, in most situations, except when journeying. And during journeying, that's when they can and should roll independently. So really, they're there also to help with the journeying phase of the game. And at other times, they should really, when it makes narrative sense, just be adding an extra die or two. And I've put this point in here that if the main PC dies, the companion can get upgraded to replace the main PC. So they're also there because it is quite possible your main PC will die. I don't want to spoil my Forbidden Lands solo campaign, but there is a pretty gritty thing that happens in that with my main PC, and having a companion was actually quite useful. But it does mean that you can keep your campaign going without having to like jump narratively to a different place on the map and create a new character who may or may not have any connection to the game you've just been playing. It's quite nice to have a companion who can pick up where you've left off. All the time you've invested into that campaign is not necessarily wasted, because you can use a character who is right there in the thick of things, has a connection to the previous character, and you can kind of just pick up and keep running with it, albeit from a different perspective. So those are really those are kind of the main points to make about companions. There's a lot I could say about why I don't think companions should have willpower points, but really the idea behind that was, and again, you can ignore that and include willpower points in your own game. You can make the game your own. That shouldn't need to be said. And I just noticed, one second, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you don't need to see all that, Three Skulls say something blurb. Sorry, this is all kind of administrative. There we go. Right. So willpower points give access to really cool talents. And one thing I've suggested is, I think I've suggested somewhere, is that they're only given a single general talent. So although they will have a kin talent, I'm kind of saying just try and simplify the companions right down. They are there to help out in certain circumstances. But if you give them willpower points, if you give them profession talents, if you allow their kin talents to be activated, you're adding a level of complexity to these companions where you're almost making them into a full PC anyway. So by taking out the willpower points, by not allowing them to push their roles when they're acting independently, they're kind of staying as a sort of sidekick. They're not taking the focus away from your main character. And if you would like to if you want to play with multiple PCs, of course you can do that as well. That's not an issue. But this is the way I've designed this, and in playtesting, I feel it went really well too. Right. So, motivation. This was a big one. I was trying to think about why, okay, you have a companion. The Forbidden Lands is different for a lot of people, but I wanted to have some sort of like reason for why the companion would be traveling with you, where you could just roll on a table and you wouldn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it, or just pick one out at random. And in fact, I say roll. I'm using roll on a table because that's just habit, but of course you're drawing a card instead. And these are things like wanderlust, they're fugitive, they're in exile, vengeance, etc. There's these little motivations behind the companions that make them a little bit more three-dimensional, rather than just being an NPC set of stats there to help you mechanically so you don't die, which is the primary reason for them existing, right? But this way, it gives them a bit of a place in the world. It gives them a reason to be traveling with you, and also gives them some motivations so that when or if they become your main PC, you've got a really good idea behind how to use them. Okay, then under the creation, so one thing I think is really important, as you can see here, is that I started thinking about was, if you have just a random table, like one of my early drafts had a random table of the professions, and you just like draw a card, and that's the profession of your companion. And in early playtesting, it became apparent that you would often get things like you would get the same profession that you have. You would get professions that just don't really make a lot of sense together. Like if your main character is a sorcerer, you probably would want to take somebody who is good at, like a fighter, like a tank, if you will, that word, to help protect you, because although this isn't really like a D&D style game, but you wouldn't necessarily take like a peddler with you, right? Although it could be quite interesting. So what I decided was, rather than doing it where you draw randomly, is basically just give some advice here, and that is recommended companion professions based on what your main PC has as a profession. And that way you get a little bit more kind of synergy between the two professions, where they're going to complement themselves a little bit better, because you're picking a companion's profession based on your own preferences. And of course, they're just recommendations, you can ignore them, but I feel like that kind of should help a little bit with coming up with something interesting. And in fact, looking at sorcerer says any. I'm not going to go down the sorcerer path. I didn't actually playtest with any sorcerers, I have to say. I think some other playtesters did. I'm a low magic kind of guy. I don't like magic myself. When I play games, I don't almost never play a caster. But yeah, that's just me. Okay, then I recommend using the life path system from Legends and Adventures to create the companion. That's the rolling the tables to come up with like their background and some formative events, etc. The one with these tweaks, which is rather than rolling for a profession, you pick one, obviously based on that there. Don't give them any talents, and give them an extra formative event. Oh, this is something I forgot. A character creation for your main PC as well is if you're doing the life path generation, I recommend taking an additional formative event when you're young. So you start with, every character starts with at least, with 2 formative events, and then you get the 1 additional or the 2nd additional, depending if you go with being an adult or being old. So yeah, you ignore the talents. So you're basically giving them a bit more background. They're getting a little bit more in the way of kit, in the way of equipment. And then you draw a card, and that is their general talent. And I went through the entire general talent list in the book, and I cherry-picked the ones that I felt were complementary to adventuring, like to journeying, that sort of thing. So none of these are really combat-focused. They are crafting or journeying specific. And that's very specific. I didn't want this companion to be basically like the intention of it being a character who's really going to just be a combat monkey. I wanted them to be basically someone who's going to help in a lot of other like utility ways. So there's a little blurb there about animal companions, and really in the book, rules as written, the only way to have an animal companion is if you're a hunter and you take the Path of the Beast talent. And so here I've basically expanded on that a little bit and said, if you want to have an animal companion, and you want it to be kind of like a companion, right? So it can act independently, it can help in some way. I've effectively just taken a page out of Vasen, which has a talent called Pet, and it will allow you to have a single extra die when it's relevant. So this is effectively the same thing. Yeah, but I've actually said here it won't be able to act on its own. So yeah, if you want an independent if you want an independently acting animal companion, you really need that Path of the Beast talent and be play a hunter. Okay. And then the last bit here. So I thought this was really important. I didn't have this in the first couple of drafts, but some of the other playtesters said it would be nice to have, a bit of a walkthrough on how to actually get started with it. So this is how this is like through playtesting. This is what we've come up with. The first one is the situation for how you got together. You're rolling on the How Did You Meet table in the Legends and Adventures booklet. And that tells you how your game begins. And my recommendation really is, although it's not written here, is to have it happen like your game happens either with that event starting or shortly after it's happened. Because it's just a really, they're quite evocative. There's a really nice way to hook your players into getting started with the game. Then I've got, I've recommended that you create a legend from the same booklet, and that legend should be viewed as a major reason for you setting out. So wanting to treat this as a sandbox, not necessarily to run Raven's Purge solo. Those legends really are very important and really need to be utilized. So having a legend at the start is super important, in my opinion. A location, you decide where you're going to start, and I've given there was a lot of discussion in our playtesting server about how this should be done. And in the end, I wanted to just I wanted to leave it a little bit vague. I didn't want to provide a way to pick a random hex. We talked about that. I'd had to think about how to do it, doing drop tables on the map, that sort of thing. But ultimately, I just left it up to you, the readers, the solo players, and just said, you can pick a random hex, however you want to do that. It's up to you. You can pick a place that's tied to your kin. I've given the page for the kin map in the Game Master's Guide, or you can roll for your homeland, which you do in Legends and Adventures, page 4, etc. So, yeah, there's a number of ways you can do this, but that's just one way that maybe you can pick where the hex that you're starting off with. Date, that's important is all to mention. You need to think about the dates because the seasons come into play when you're journeying quite a bit in this game, and yeah. That's something you're going to need to be tracking. First moves. So once you're ready, it is assumed to be morning. Follow the new quarter-day procedure as provided on the next page, which is this journeying for one section here. We'll go over that in a second. And then advancement. This is important as well, but basically, because you don't have sessions in solo play, a solo play session could be 10 minutes, it could be 10 hours. It's whenever you have time to play, and I think it's very important that advancement really just takes that into consideration for solo games. So in this way, what we've done is we're keeping the questions from the book. We're ignoring the point of XP you get for attending a session. And instead, at the start of every day, so like at the morning phase, you ask yourself the questions and you award yourself the XP. Now, you can obviously tweak that if you find it's going too fast, and you could do it like every other day or once a week or something like that. But I actually don't mind the XP gain to be relatively quick in solo play because you are just so bloody squishy that I think having it kind of happen at a fairly high rate is okay. But what would be nice, something I've thought about since, is it might be nice to have a little caveat in here and just say that just mention that this will result in a slightly faster than, doing it every day could be maybe too fast for some people. So maybe play it by ear, maybe start with every other day and then gradually increase it if you find it's too slow, or slow it down even more if you think it's too fast. So that's something I'll just mention here. Might make it into, this is still the beta. I still want to give some more feedback to Free League about this. What you're seeing here, so that might make it into the final set of rules. Okay, so journeying for one. I'm just gonna take a quick sip of beer. Prost. Because that was a lot of talking. And I'll have a quick look at the chat here as well. Tibor's asking any other languages. I have no idea. I'm sure other translations will be allowed because it's well, actually, I don't know if they will be allowed, if you're could be allowed to copy them. You'd have to get in touch with Free League to ask. Is it Ravenland Adventures, or would it work in Bitterreach and Asleen? Magnus. Magnus is the author of Bitterreach, so yeah. I can see why you're asking that. And in fact, if I skip ahead a little bit, you'll see that we actually have Bitterreach. One of the oracles has the Bitterreach and Asleen mentioned in them. So we have tried to take both of the expansions into consideration. One thing I did realize after the event is this factions table here is only written for the Ravenlands, and I've proposed to Free League to write 2 additional faction tables to replace this weather table, because there is actually a weather table earlier in the Book of Beasts, so there's actually no need for this second one here. And to keep the layout relatively consistent, 2 shorter faction tables, one for Bitterreach and one for Blood March. So yeah, anyway, we're trying to think about that. We're trying to take both of the expansions into consideration. Yeah, anyway. JP is here too. Cool. Yeah, all right. So those are kind of questions dealt with, other than the big one from Magnus, the biggest challenge. So journeying for one, this is the procedure. This is the kind of the core of the game as you're traveling. And basically the way it works is, you know, you're looking at quarter days. You're kind of keeping track of quarter days in this game. So every morning, what you do is you shuffle your deck of cards, and that's the only time you shuffle your deck of cards. And then it's ready for the new day. You use the XP prompts, as we talked about, to earn XP from the previous day, and then you roll for weather. And we'll see whether that's going to be this table or the table earlier in the book, or if you're playing Bitterreach, the weather table from the Bitterreach, of course. Then you assign and resolve tasks for the PC and the companion. So that's just basically saying if you're traveling, then you perform the new hex procedure, which is this one here. This table, basically, you draw a card and consult the table. That's if you're entering a new hex, or you draw for a general encounter if you're keeping watch over a camp. So you can see here there's a new general encounter table that I've created. Yeah, so that's basically to cover the elements of the game where when you're making camp, or when you've made camp and you're keeping watch while everyone else is sleeping, it's in the core rules for Forbidden Lands, it's up to the GM to decide whether something happens. And this general encounter, this could be something that GMs could use in their game as well as a way of randomizing whether something happens or not. When you draw your cards 2 through 7, so that's 6 of the 13 cards result in nothing happening. So just under half of the results are there is no encounter. But otherwise, if you draw an 8 or higher, then obviously you're going to get one of these other ones. There's 27, I believe, results here, and I've tried to keep them relatively. Yeah, I mean, they're really difficult to design. Actually, this was probably the hardest design challenge for me, because the general encounters, I wanted them to feel vague enough that they could go in lots of different directions. I wanted them to be able to be expanded on with some of the other oracles. They needed to work where if you were entering a new hex and you were traveling, they would make sense. And they needed to work where if you were stopped in one place, they would also make one sense. So it couldn't be like, yeah, some of the, like when I first wrote it, there were a number of entries that were like, well, that would make no sense if you were in the middle of a camp and keeping watch over a camp. Why would that suddenly happen? And yeah, so that was something to think about, and that was probably the biggest challenge was, you know, the various different iterations that this table went through until I was happy with it, which is how it looks now. But yeah, anyway, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit. So you basically roll scouting to see if the encounter can be spotted in time, just like in the core rulebook. But I've said here, if you roll 2 or more successes, you gain advantage on the next roll relating to the encounter. Then you resolve. I'm not sure if that's rules as written. I can't remember. Then you use oracles as needed to resolve situations that would normally need a GM. And then you proceed to the next quarter day and start again from step 1. Obviously, if it's morning, you can skip past that. So it's basically just this very simple loop. And the loop is basically saying, if it's morning, shuffle your deck of cards, give yourself some XP, and roll for weather. Otherwise, use the encounter tables here. That's pretty much it. I mean, it's a procedure. It's written down, but it's really quite simple. And the hex procedure, you draw a card, and depending on what you've drawn, it's going to determine whether it's one of the random encounter. It's from the random encounter table in the Game Master's Guide. And it says here, page 123 of this book, of the Book of Beasts. So what I've actually said, it says roll a d66 and choose between the two. So you would roll the d66, you would look at the entry in the Game Master's Guide, and you would look at the entry in the Book of Beasts, and you would decide on which one probably makes the most sense, or which one excites you the most as a solo player. So rather than trying to split it two different ways, I've kind of left it open for the player to decide on which one they want to go with. If you get a face card, so a jack, queen, or a king, you have one of the new general encounters. And if you get an ace, you come across an adventure site. And there are random tables to create random adventure sites in the Game Master's Guide of the core rules, and that's what I've recommended people do to create them. So we haven't really gone into a lot of details on, redesigning how that works. It's just basically use the random tables for creating those in the Game Master's Guide to create them if you come across one. And then there's a blurb here at the bottom which is talking about using published adventure sites, and really just a little bit of advice on how that works, how you should run it, and the caveat to say if you're going to run something that's published, you're going to have to read it to understand how it works, which means you're going to spoil it to an extent. You're going to know what happens. You're going to know what the kind of the beats are. You're going to know what the motivations for the bad guys are, that sort of thing, so you know how to run it properly. And it's just the nature of the beast. So if you want to run like Raven's Purge, for example, or the campaign that's in the Bitter Reach, or the campaign that's going to be in the Blood March, you're going to have to be, like, really read it as a GM almost, and then decide how your solo player handles it. So, yeah. I recommend these solo rules work best for campaign play where you're not actually running pre-written adventures. That said, what I am hoping, because there will be a workshop, there is a workshop for Forbidden Lands, I'm hoping that people will create solo adventure sites. So adventure sites specifically written to be solo friendly, so that solo players can have some third-party adventure sites they can randomly pull up and work their way through. That would be really awesome. I would like to make some myself. It's just that I don't know how much time I'm going to have because I'm working on so many other things right now. But that's one of the things on my to-do list eventually, is to create some solo adventure sites. I know Per is on this, was in the chat earlier, and I've had a little chat with him because he's created a number of adventure sites on the marketplace. And I think it would be cool to have a few small ones to kind of complement these. Aha, still here. Cool. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm hoping to see some additional content coming out of there. There are a lot of adventure sites, third-party adventure sites for Forbidden Lands already, so it'd be kind of cool to supplement them with some solo ones too. Okay. General encounters. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I've designed it in such a way that they become, like, the higher the value of the card, the more intense they become. So if you look at, like, if you get an ace, it's either going to be a sorcerer and a soldier, rival adventurers, warriors from a faction, that's where this faction table comes into play, or an aggressive monster. So the ace of spades is you come across a monster. Monsters being shit, run away. Really, like, don't mess with a monster solo unless you've been, solo adventuring for a long time already in game. Yeah, and the kind of the lower results here, 8, 9, and 10, for example. 8 are things like there's an unusual smell coming from the ground, so just a bit of, like, uncanny valley there. Thick fog rises from the ground, but only comes up to knee height. Now those two are kind of, they're not that generic, but I'm not saying what they're from. You can kind of decide what that means. You could replace it with something else if you wanted, if that's happening multiple times. But those were some of the things I wanted to kind of put in there, that there's something uncanny happening. Then there's some uncanny terrain, like a crater, an odd tree, a sandy patch in the middle of a forest, etc. And spades, where the weather worsens in some way. So it either gets colder or wetter, stormier, etc. And the 9 are kind of going with the same thing, the same theme as before. There's a faint smell of smoke on the breeze. There's a great flock of birds making a huge cacophony overhead. There's signs of a recent battle that you see, so some fresh graves. The site is potentially haunted. And whispering can be heard neither distant nor nearby. And the whispering could be anything. It could be bandits setting up an ambush, creeping up on your camp, all sorts of, or it could be just be something else entirely. So those are intended to be a little bit more generic, a little bit more flavorful, but leave the door open to using the oracles to try and find out more. And then as it goes a bit further, there's actually specific people or creatures that you are coming across. So you've got things like game, where you roll for on the hunting tables in the player's handbook. So it could be a deer, a boar, a fox, a crow, something like that. Wolves, a bear. That's the 10 results. The 10 result are animals. Then you've got things like NPCs from if you get a jack, who are not necessarily dangerous, but I've stuck with something from I didn't mention this at the beginning. Twilight 2000 has a general theme for their oracle tables, which is the black suits are bad and the red suits are good, generally speaking. And I've tried to keep that theme going here. And that's why if you're looking at things like the jack entry, wandering villager and an escaped slave are on the red suits. Those aren't bad for your character necessarily. But on the clubs or the spades, you have hunters who could be aggressive, and slavers. And slavers are probably going to want to take a solo adventure as a slave. And likewise, if you go down to the queen entry, you've got the Quard Pilgrims and the Raven Sisters, who generally speaking are going to be neutral or friendly, depending on your kin, of course. And the clubs are the Watcher Minstrels and Rust Brothers. Now, Rust Brothers being pretty bad. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the kind of the theme I've gone with in here. The ace is really like the really big encounters to have with people. So, and the ace of spades being you've encountered a monster. So, monster encounters are only going to happen if you get an ace for your new hex. If you get a face card first for your new hex procedure, and then you draw the ace of spades. Where'd I go? And then you draw the ace of spades for your general encounter. Or if you draw an ace of spades anyway, like when you're making camp, then that would trigger a monster to come. So the ace of spades is the monster card, basically, but only when you're doing it for general encounters. In terms of numbers, I put some advice up here, which is basically if you draw an NPC or a group of NPCs, a good general rule of thumb is to have the same number as the number of PCs, including companions. And I say this because you can play this co-op, obviously, as well, in which case there would be 2 PCs. But I've said you can also roll a D3 or D6 if you want to make it more random. So if left it up to people, there was some discussion. In fact, earlier on, I actually had D3 or D6 on almost all of these entries. And in the end, I just wanted it to be a little bit more generic. I wanted to leave it up to the solo players to decide how many they would be encountering. So you can decide whether it's just 1, maybe 2, or you can roll some dice to decide otherwise. Okay, factions. I went through the Game Master's Guide. I pulled out basically all the factions that would be interesting to come across. These are factions that would have warriors because there's specifically warriors from a faction. So these are the kind of militant factions that you might run across from all of the kin that are listed there. Yeah. So that's why there's the factions there. I would be doing the same for Bitter Reach. I hope to do the same for Bitter Reach and Blood March. Okay, moving on. Exploring the map. Just talk about how, hex crawling is ideal for solo play. There's a procedure in there already. How the journey rules, so you don't really need to do much to change. You don't need to change much in the way of the journey rules in the player's handbook, because they almost basically work as written. The only tweak that really needs to be addressed is keeping watch at camp, which we've already talked about, and that's when you would draw a card on the general encounter table to see if anything comes, if you encounter anything at camp. Okay, then we come to the oracles. And the first oracle here is the yes/no oracle. And I've got some advice here at the beginning, which is, rule number 1, go with your gut. So don't use this oracle unless you're really not sure or you want to add some randomness there, right? So this is anytime you'd be asking the the GM a question that would have a yes or no answer, you can ask this instead. And then there's basically I've basically copied the table from Twilight 2000. I've worded it slightly differently, but it's basically the same table. In fact, in Twilight 2000, there isn't even a table. It basically says you draw a card. If it's red, if it's a red suit, the answer is yes. If it's a black card, the answer is no. And it just basically says the higher or the lower the card, the more extreme yes or maybe, like a maybe. If it's a low value, it might be a maybe answer. It's a bit like ambiguous, right? But it doesn't actually give you any values, and I didn't find that too useful when I ran Twilight 2000. So when I did Twilight 2000, I actually codified what exactly the different card values meant, and that's what I've put into here. So just because it just takes that ambiguity away, and it's basically, okay, you got a face card, that's a yes, right? But with a complication. If you got an ace, then it's always an exceptional yes, or it's an exceptional no. And 4 through 10 are yes. The higher the number, the more definitive the answer. And if you ever get a 2 or 3, it's going to be a maybe. Okay. Helpful hazardous oracles, also from Twilight 2000. That's basically if you need to find out if an NPC or village is helpful or hazardous. This is basically like the old school role playing, like reaction. What they called reaction tables, I think, from old school D&D. Yeah, so you can roll on this, you can draw a card on this to see, how the NPCs or a village would react. Then I've got the theme oracle. Now, this is another thing where I had a lot of thoughts about which way this could go, how many different oracles I could have here. And I took a page out of Ironsworn earlier, and I had two. One thing I really like about Ironsworn are the aspect and focus tables, I believe they're called, or oracles. They basically give you a verb and a noun, right? And there's 100 of each. They're really great. They can be used in lots of different games as well. But here, and in my first draft, they were originally in there. And when I was looking at how to cut the word count down, this was one area where I made some savings. And the reason being, I took a page from tarot. Now, in tarot, you have tarot cards. When you use tarot cards tarot cards originally were just playing cards that people used before they became the way they look today. And they were used for divination, like as we kind of understand it today, really quite late in the a couple of hundred years after kind of tarot cards were invented or were kind of in circulation. Really it was around the 1800s, I believe, from my like couch research into the tarot from many years ago. That it was kind of around the 1800s when like kind of divination through the tarot really picked up, and like into the early 1900s when people started, really using the Rider-Waite decks, those sorts of decks, like the really famous ones that we kind of look at today. They're relatively new in the history of like playing cards. But one thing I really like about them is they're quite evocative for role-playing, right? They're really evocative for an oracle, for this sort of thing here. So what I did, now a tarot deck has more cards than a standard deck of cards. I think it has 70 something. I think 72, but I think it might even be more than that. And what I did was I took out the major arcana, which are, if you've ever seen a tarot deck, they're the cards that have like death and the sun and the joker, the fool, etc. All these like named people cards. I took them out because we don't have them, obviously, in playing a normal deck of cards. And you have four suits in a tarot deck of 14 cards each. They have one. They're numbered like 1 through 10. I think there might even be an ace. I think it's called an ace as well, actually. So ace through 10, and then you have a page. From memory, a page, a knight. I think a queen and a king. So basically, your jack and your knight, or your page and your knight, sorry, are the jack, right? Or they become the jack. They've kind of subsumed themselves into a jack in our current 13 value deck of cards. So what I did is for you can map each of the 4 suits, so pentacles, cups, staves, and swords. You can map them to the 4 current suits in a deck of playing cards. And then basically what I just did is I looked at the meanings, the divination meanings for each of those cards, and I pulled a single word meaning. These can have lots of different meanings. And what I tried to do is I tried to stick with the red suits, diamonds and hearts, being more or less positive, right? Because that's what it said. So looking at the positive aspects of the meanings of those tarot cards. And for the black cards, trying to look at the more negative aspects of the divination elements. So, yeah, but I've also tried to keep it relatively neutral because I didn't want it to be like, it's only good or it's only bad. I wanted to have some kind of like middle ground in there. And also, you know, if some of the meanings were really juicy and really, really good for Forbidden Lands, I wasn't going to ignore that if it meant having a positive result on a black card or a negative result on a red card, for example. So that's what I did. And the only place that kind of, there was a little bit of a hiccup was when it came to the page and the knights, because I had two results. But I just basically cherry picked the one I liked the best and stuck it in. So that's what you've got there. The Oracle, I did come up, that took a long time to come up with. I wouldn't say it was a challenge. I actually really enjoyed coming up with that Oracle. But it was a way for me to go through to actually put into practice some of the tarot research I've done in the past, and really just make it tie it a little bit into this game. So yeah, anyway, that wasn't put into the blurb in the book. Some people get put off by the tarot because there's a perceived link to Satanism and things. But anyway, as a divination, as a real world method of divination that people use, it was too juicy to just ignore. So that's what we've got there. And also, when I was coming up with these words as well, I was trying to word them in such a way that they made sense in the setting as well. So and it was pretty easy to do. So yeah, that's something I really did enjoy doing. What would be cool would be to have an actual tarot deck, what's considered the standard tarot these days, the Rider-Waite or whatever that sort of style of deck, and have this same theme oracle but tied to an actual. In fact, this might be something I do for a workshop thing, because that would be quite fun. So just expanding on this, but so you're actually using the full tarot deck with the 22 major arcana in it as well, because I think that'd be quite evocative. And I've just seen, there's some chat now going in. Ralden Nash has said, actually having a themed tarot deck in Forbidden Lands, that would be awesome. Like with all the artwork and stuff matching up, that would be really cool. But yeah. Randy, I have 8 different tarot decks. Wow, nice. I think I have like 3 or 4. Anyway, yeah. I not to plug other stuff, but I'm working on another game which is called Pitchfork, which is kind of themed around medieval Europe, medieval Germany specifically, and I'm going to be having a tarot deck in that, and in fact I'm commissioning an artist to make a commissioned deck of tarot cards. I like really love tarot cards. I think they're really great for oracles and things, and I'd love to see more of them in games. There are a lot of people in the indie scene actually making games around tarot decks too. Just we like our dice too, don't we? Okay, let's move on. I then have some other oracles here if you need them. The Wilderness Oracle was a late addition to the rules. Attila actually really asked for them and pushed for me to include them. I was a bit hesitant to include them at first, but in the end, I was convinced, and they actually do work really well in practice. But it's basically, the idea is if you need a bit of extra detail on a hex you're traveling in, the hexes are relatively there's not a lot of detail on the map, right? It's like, oh, it's a plain, it's plains, or it's forest, or it's hills, or it's mountains, or there's a river here, etc. You don't get a lot of detail for most of the map. So this was a way to say, you've got there 4 columns. One is hills and mountains, plains and forests, marshes and quagmires, and watchways and shorelines. And the idea is, if you want to like add a bit of flavor to your location, you draw a card, and boom, there's an isolated dwelling here, there's an animal lair, there's scorched earth, etc. And as you get lower down is when they get a bit more specific. So things like, if you look at the ace, for example, there are things that are, would only be in one of these very specific types of places. So that was late addition. I really like this. I really like this oracle. I'm really glad Attila challenged me to put it in. So yeah. Then we get to the kin oracle. So if you need to randomly generate a kin, this is one way to do it. As you can see here, we've got an oracle for the Ravenlands and for the Bitter Reach. What we don't have yet is one for Asleen, because obviously when I wrote these, the Blood March book hadn't been written yet. I'm hoping, well, this will have to be written before the final version comes out, so I imagine I'll be putting that in, or maybe someone from Free League will do it. I'm not sure. Okay, then we have on the other side of the page here, you can see the kin names oracle, and this was also really fun to do. So I looked at, I actually spoke to Eric, the author, who did all the setting, the setting work, and I asked him about real world, like how he came up with the names for each of the cultures, each of the kin in Forbidden Lands. Was he using, like real world cultures as a basis for some of the names, etc.? And he gave me his, he'd written a document about this for his own like research and for his own notes in Swedish, and he translated it for me, sent it to me, and I was able to use that as a basis to effectively do what you see here. There were a few, like the goblins and I think the wolfkin and the orcs. I think those three were basically all very, very vague guidelines. And so I kind of looked at the names that you could find in the books, and I tried to make things that phonetically sounded kind of similar. But that was a really fun one to come up with. So yeah, we got kin name oracles, where we've got sort of masculine and feminine sounding names for each of the kin that you find in each of the books. And this would work with Asleen as well. Oh, the goblin. Yeah. The goblins, actually, there's a bit of Hungarian in there. I'm not sure if the whole thing, I think the whole thing might be actually Hungarian. But yeah, anyway. And I think goblin, there was no real guidance around that. So I think I went with Hungarian, because some of the names given there sounded slightly similar to me to Hungarian. But I like the names too. I'm not saying that Hungarians are goblins, of course, but I really like the sounds of the names for one of the races, and the goblins was one that was wide open that didn't actually have quite specific rules for. Okay. Yeah. Magnus is saying that Eric used to find names on Human Anatomy and then adjust them slightly. Yeah, and he had some funny methodology in his notes as well, which I couldn't really replicate. But anyway, it's there. There's a name oracle, a whole page of names if you need them. Okay, then we have traits, and this was another one that was a little bit of a challenge to come up with, because what I wanted to do here, and it might not be super clear at first what exactly I'm getting at here with the little blurb at the top, but effectively these are character traits for people. And what I wanted to do is I really wanted to have character traits for a community as well. But I didn't want to be replicating this table twice, because that didn't make a lot of sense. So in the end, what I went with was a lot of character traits don't make sense for a group of people. They're very specific to a single person, like absent-minded. You wouldn't have a whole village full of absent-minded people. Maybe you could. Or charming, confident, cunning. Those aren't really traits to describe a group of people, right? So what I did is I was quite specific with how I came up with this list. Again, I tried to use the tarot as a guide, but in the end, I ended up making lots of changes to how this was coming out. And the way it works is if you're using an NPC, then you have a full 52 set of 52 results that you can draw from. Each card gives you a trait for that NPC. If you're using this table for a community, you effectively ignore the hearts and the spades column. So that's where it says NPC diamonds or NPC, community red, community black. So if you're using this for a community, you look at the first and the third columns only, because those have been specifically selected so that they would apply to, could apply equally to a community or a group of people as to a single person. Yeah, okay. We're almost to the end here. There's a couple pages left. The next one I wanted to talk about was combat. One thing I wanted to really talk about here is that advanced combat rules are a perfect fit for solo, because it's duels one-on-one, and if you're playing solo, you're a single player, right? You're a single player character. You have a companion as well, but that's not a problem. And the only issue it brought up in playtesting was with the double up card. So the idea is you lay 2 cards randomly. So you have like you always have 2 sets of cards in every physical set of like box set. So you take the second set of cards, you shuffle up the second set, place it down there, draw 2, set them down in front of you, and those are the two that the your opponent is using. So it's completely random, right? And the only thing that made I needed to kind of work around was the double up card. And just there's only one double up card, and the way it works basically is if you draw that first, you just put it. I mean, it's kind of ruins it a bit because you then know what the second action is going to be. But by then you've already drawn your own 2 actions, so it doesn't really matter. If you get a double up first, then you just turn it back over and you take the other one instead as the first one, and the double up is that same action again. It works well. I mean, it's not quite the same as playing against a GM who actually is where there's actually some some tactics and some psychology going on at play there. It is completely random, but it does work quite well. I've suggested initiative tweaks to keep things kind of kept together. And companions. I needed to talk about companions. And what I've suggested here is really simple. Really have them try to help the main PC's action as much as possible rather than having them always act separately. That's very vague and deliberately so. If you are playing a melee type of character and your companion is a hunter, then they're probably going to be shooting arrows, acting independently every round, and that's fine. I would then suggest don't have them do lots of complex things. Just have them rain arrows at your enemies, just so that they do their thing, and you're moving the focus back to yourself, doing some other interesting things, as quickly as possible. I've suggested a similar thing for enemies, which is to combine their actions with help dice as often as possible, using the page 9 from the Game Master's Guide as which tells you how to do that. And the last thing to think about, which came up also in playtesting, was when you've defeated your enemies and you want to loot their corpses. You know, the thing that on Twitter right now everyone's kind of saying is a terrible thing to do. You have equipment for NPCs in the books. What you don't have is consumables. There are no consumables written down for any NPCs in the books, and that needs addressing because you would often, as a GM, you might just say, "Oh yeah, you find some torches on them, or you find some food or some water that they're carrying." So the way to do it here was you draw a card to see if there's any additional loot on them, and you only find additional loot if it's a face card or an ace. If it's a number card, then you don't find anything extra. And the way I've done it is that on a jack, queen, or a king, you find either torches, water, or food. And if you get an ace, then you find something good. You find either a precious carried find, a valuable carried find, or simple carried find. These are the treasure tables that you can find in the Game Master's Guide. So you actually find something really good. And it can actually come up with some bizarre results like, oh, they're actually carrying a bronze statue that weighs 10 encumbrance units. But you could, I guess, draw again if that was the case, and you don't want to break immersion that much by saying, "Oh, I've just fought this person who was like dodging and rolling around, and it turns out they had a bronze statue strapped to their back the whole time." Anyway, last bit here is about social interactions. If you look, if I change the page here, this is the last bit here. And really, this is the one area that I really changed things up. One of the other constraints from Free League was that they didn't want me to reinvent the wheel. They didn't really want me to mess around with any of the core mechanics in Forbidden Lands. So they don't want me to like redo how the game works at all, really, or as little as possible. But I really wanted to bring some player-facing mechanics in for social interactions. Because what I didn't like in playtesting when I was originally doing it was rolling for manipulation and then rolling the NPC's insight. And it just felt like a lot of rolling for, And it occurred to me that I could take a page out of Vasen and Tales from the Loop and borrow that here as a way of setting a target number of successes for an NPC. All I needed to do was to figure out and come up with a way of showing what those target numbers should be. So that's what I've done. And basically what you do is you look at the NPC's wits if you're trying to manipulate them, or their empathy if they're attempting to manipulate you. And the value of their attribute determines how many successes you need to roll to either manipulate them or resist them manipulating you. So it's really quite straightforward. It's kind of like, well, yeah, you're going to need at least one success anyway. But you know, if they're particularly witty or particularly empathetic, then you're going to need more than one success. And then I've also said if an NPC is particularly gifted in either insight or manipulation, depending on which way you're interacting with them, you should also consider further modifying your role by removing one or more skill dice. So I'm not recommending you increase or increase the number of successes required. Instead, I'm saying you remove some of the dice from your own pool. So that's a way of kind of like double dipping with the penalties, if you will. If someone has like really, really high wits or empathy score and they're like talented in manipulation or whatever, and you're trying to engage with them socially, then you're going to need a lot of successes and you're going to be having a penalty against your dice pool. I've also mentioned, of course, that your bargaining position and reputation influence your role as normal. Then, role-playing in villages. This was something that I didn't originally put in there. This came in, I think, relatively late in the design process. But I found it myself when I was doing the Forbidden Lands solo campaign, or actual play on my channel. And that was that when you come to a village, it's easy to come up with the stats for a village using the random tables in the Game Master's Guide. What wasn't so easy is once you've got this village is, well, what actually happens when you get there? How are you interacting with this village now that you've created it? And it just made me stop to think about ways that I could codify, almost some steps that you would go through or some advice on how to approach a village. So that's where we have it here. The first thing is to use all of the village creation tables in the Game Master's Guide. And I've especially said those on pages 167 to 170. Whichever those are. I haven't got it open in front of me right now. Let me just open it actually quickly so we can just see which ones those are. Give me 1 second. Game Master's Guide, 5th printing. 169 I said, right? And the numbers don't quite correspond here. So these here. So the ruler of the village, the problem of the village, the claim to fame, the village oddity. Those are the main ones I really am talking about. Names, the name of the inn and the village inn itself, they're all right, they're okay. But they're like the really juicy ones are these ones here: the claim to fame, the oddity, the problem, and the ruler. Right. So roll for all of them for a village. Then look for obvious hooks generated from these tables and use one of them as your entry point. Make good use of the oracles. Right. So that's really just saying, look at them. And the obvious one is a problem. There's a problem with the village, right? Or maybe the claim to fame, right? Or the village. I mean, all of these have some really cool entry, like good points to them, really good places, like hooks you could kind of jump off of. Then don't stress about role-playing the dialogue if you're not ready or comfortable. Your game won't grind to a halt if you keep things a bit more zoomed out. That was the other thing, is like, oh man, there's a whole village full of NPCs. Do I have to like role-play all these NPCs? And obviously in a solo game, you do whatever you want, do whatever feels comfortable, right? So I think that just kind of needed saying, because other people were saying they found it a little bit daunting when they got to a village. They actually stopped playing because they were intimidated by having to roleplay a whole village full of people. Like, it's a lot easier to just do the journeying and stuff, but having a village full of social interactions is hard. And then I've added here some examples of questions you can ask the oracles to kickstart your village interactions. How do the villagers react to us? Roll on the helpful or hazardous oracle. Or, does anyone in the village approach us for help? Roll on the yes or no oracle, and then on the theme oracle if the answer is yes, to determine the nature of this villager's problem. X is the village problem. Will the village leader let me help them with it? Roll on the yes or no oracle. X is what the village is known for. Is that thing in jeopardy somehow? Roll on the yes or no oracle. So those are some ideas where, if there's something that the village is known for, it's got claim to fame is their cheese or whatever, and you roll and you get yes, that it's in jeopardy somehow. Something's wrong with the cheese. Then the villagers are going to be desperate, right? That's what they're known for. The whole village could be, facing financial ruin if this claim to fame ends up no longer being there. So they might be desperate for help, and there's a great entry point for adventure hooks and social interactions and stuff. The last bit here is this section, playing so with others. In hindsight, this probably should have gone closer to the front of the section, and that might happen in the final thing. But this just basically says, like, you can either play it solo, you can play it co-op with a friend, you can play it co-op with more than one friend. You could use this for as a GM for a normal GM'd game, but add a little bit more of a level of randomness to it, so it doesn't feel as arbitrary that you're coming up with all the decisions. You could use the yes no oracle for a lot of people. You could use the theme oracles for a lot of things. You could have the players, and they ask you a question, be like, oh, that's actually a really good question, why don't we consult the oracle? I actually do this a lot in my own GM games. For example, I'm running the One Ring for a friend, so it's one player and just me as the lore master, and I'm using Strider mode with him because he's got a single player hero, and really just a lot of the content from Strider mode applies. And I've been using a lot of the oracles as well, where I would normally traditionally I would just come up with these things. I would innovate and I would come up with an answer, but it's actually been quite fun for both of us to consult the oracle and then figure out together what that means, where I actually have final say because I'm the lore master. But yeah, that's another way you could play it. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking there for a minute. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat now while I have a quick drink. Otherwise, and then I'll look at the Q&A. I'll look at the questions, any questions I haven't answered, and we'll finish up with that. So yeah, hit me up in the comments right now. This is your chance in the chat to ask questions. Okay, Magnus, what was the biggest challenge? I've answered that. The biggest challenge was designing the general encounter table here. Definitely. It just because I went through several iterations and trying to come up with entries that I felt were generic enough, but also added enough variety. Yeah, it was hard to do. And if you look at the encounter tables in Forbidden Lands, they are very specific, like little vignettes, little stories that are happening, and that's just really hard to do solo. I didn't want to do more of the same, and I didn't want to, and it's hard to because they're being, as I've said before, they're being used in two different situations, either on the road or in a camp, and writing something very specific is hard to do where it matches both of those. I could come up with about maybe half a dozen when I first started thinking about it, but thinking like, oh my god, I got to come up with like over 20 of them. And it eats right into the word count as well. So keeping it short kind of kills two birds with one stone. It helps it fit with both kind of situations where this oracle, this table would be used, but it also allows me to hit my word count a bit easier. Yeah, Fenhorn hits on there's something there that luckily a pack of gaming cards doesn't cost that much, and you can actually play other card games with them besides just using it for this. I think people are more likely to have a deck of playing cards at home than they would a 8d6. I think most people have playing cards at home, and you're right, you're absolutely right, Fenhorn, that you can get a deck of playing cards for a very, very little money, like $2 or $3, euros, whatever currency you use. I guess, yeah, 20 or 30 krona. But yeah, or more. I mean, I collect playing cards, so I've spent quite a bit of money actually on some of them, like themed ones. I think I've covered most of the questions that have come up. Well, okay. Yeah, Attila's said Pitchfork is amazing. You guys can watch a bunch of dev diaries on Matt's Three Skulls Tavern channel. That's the channel you're on right now. Um, I will warn you, the dev diaries are very long if you want to get into them. They are like 2+ hour diaries, and there are like more than 20 of them, I think, or maybe close to 20 of them. They go into a lot of depth on a lot of the design process that I go through with that game. The game's not finished either yet. I've had to put it to one side for to work on some other projects. But yeah, anyway, they are there. Cool. And then we've got some JP, we've played several co-op sessions with 3 players, been just as rich as a GM led one. Yeah, JP's was one of the play testers for this. And I was really glad that I didn't just have solo playtesters. I also had co-op playtesters, and that it worked equally well for both sets of groups. I actually only playtested it solo. I didn't playtest it with in co-op with anyone else. So if you find that co-op doesn't really work so well in your games, you have JP to blame. Yeah, I'm joking. It'll work just fine. Trust me. Okay, Magnus, what do you think other people could add to this via the workshop? There's so much. There's so much. I obviously have already talked about that I want to do a sort of expansion on it where I'm including a lot of the oracles that I was not able to include initially, or I had to take out due to page count. Sorry, not page count, word count limitations. There was some discussion on changing some of the mechanics in some ways that were a bit more friendly for solo. They could be options that might be in that expansion that I would come up with. I don't want to say what those are because I don't want anybody else to do them, and I don't know how quickly I can turn that around. It's probably going to be several months at least before I can get around to tackling this. But really just, expanding on the oracles and stuff. Somebody might do it anyway, and then I don't have to worry about it. But it is something I would like to do as the author as well. I think it would be quite cool to have, my like director's cut version of things. The other thing I've already mentioned is having, being able to use an actual deck of tarot cards instead of playing cards for some of the oracles. What I would do for that is I would probably redo the general encounter table here, and I would probably do this so that it uses the entire deck of tarot cards, because I think you could do with more general encounters personally. What I would do is I would the likelihood that there would be no encounter would be a lot less. It might even be that it's 0, and I would just make a lot of encounters be mundane things, if you will. So rather than no encounter happens, it's more like some just random thing happens where you notice a squirrel, or I don't know, something small, right? That would be a lot of work to write. I mean, this is a big challenge already. Expanding it from 25, 27-ish entries to something like 70 plus, 72, 78, something like that in a deck of tarot cards would be a huge challenge. So I don't know. It's something I think I would kind of like to do because I'd be an expanded general encounters table. I would probably keep all the entries in here as they are, and I would just add the extra ones on top of them. The theme oracle I would also do if I was to do a tarot deck expansion. That's also one I would do. I would probably keep in fact, I might actually just redo oh god, that's a lot of work. But I might just redo all of the tables in here, all of the oracles. Bloody hell, I don't know. Digging myself into a hole. I mean, I could say, remove the major. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But that's something I would like to do, or at least tackle, is a tarot deck. If you don't have, or you want to use it, if you have a tarot deck and you want to use it, then that would be a cool way to handle this. So that's another thing that could be done. I've already talked about adventure sites. Having adventure sites would be written for solo would be amazing, because then every time you draw an ace when you're going into new hex and you come across a random adventure site, it would just be, you could just, rather than rolling a d6 and figuring out whether it's a village, a dungeon, or a castle, you could have printed off ready to go, I don't know, 3 or 4 adventure sites, and you would just randomly pick one out and be like, okay, this is what I come across. Let's go. I'm going to go through this now as a solo player. It's written for solo, so you're not spoiling anything. You've got like the reveals, you've got the maps that are kind of only showing little bits each time. You've maybe got the choose your own adventure, sort of like go to this, go to the back of the booklet and look up entry number 6 for some clue that you find or whatever. I think that'd be really cool. I think a really, really cool thing to see. In fact, that's the one thing I think I would most like to see out of the workshop would be lots of adventure sites for solo play. And I guess I could show. I'm not going to show it because there's a little bit in there I don't want to spoil. But there are some supplements, some tools that could be cool here. So, like a journal tracker sheet thing, specifically for solo play, where you're keeping track of the days, the quarter days, the things that happen. I guess there are some of those already. I'm not sure how suitable they are for solo play. I didn't really use them myself when I was playtesting. I used Foundry and I used the journals in Foundry. But it could be cool to have like a sheet that is able to track things like the calendar that is in. This has the Ravenlands has a very specific calendar. It's not a Gregorian calendar like we use here in Europe, at least. Yeah, so something like that. Maybe like an oracle reference thing where the oracles are collected into one place or like laid out in sheets so you can print them off, almost like a GM screen, if you will. So you can have them all print like how they are here is that they're kind of spread through the book. And it'll be kind of hard, I think, to print them off and use them, maybe. Although I think they have actually okay layout wise. But may just compress them a bit, have a lot of the like extra white space on the screen and stuff kind of taken out of the way. Like here, you've got one encounter table. This is a really important one. In fact, but it's used with the procedure, which is also important. But this whole thing could be rewritten with this table in like, I don't know, a quarter of a page. And then you could have you could have the general encounters below it, all that on a single page, for example, if it was laid out in a different way. So, having a sort of a reference of oracles could be a cool thing to do. I don't know. Oh, there's so many other things you could do, I guess. There was talk about mishap tables, and coming up with additional mishap tables is something I probably would put into my expansion that I would do. So when you're journeying, you have the mishap tables, and some of them don't have a lot of entries. And it would be cool to have more variation on that. But that's one of these things where you're almost redoing a core element of the game. And I think there might be mishap tables like that in one of the expansions that somebody has made. But it's something I wanted to look at doing and using a deck of cards again. So you have a mishap, you draw a card. Do I want to make 52 mishaps for every journeying activity? Not really, but it would be a cool thing to do. And it would be something that I would probably include in that expansion I would want to make. Yeah, that's a lot to talk around. I'll move on to the next question. But those are some of the things I'm thinking about. Really, adventure sites would be awesome. If people can make solo adventure sites, we'd be cooking with gas. Like that is the big thing needed here, I think. Attila would love to see or do a small expansion on companions, especially dogs. Yeah, cool. I mean, if you look at what I've done here for companions, it's very like humanoid centric. This is the only bit about animal companions. So absolutely, like, it could be cool to have a whole supplement on having an animal companion and how they work and have special talents for animals and all that kind of stuff. That could be a really cool thing to do. Yep, I probably won't do it myself. Roland is asking, am I going to do the Vasen solo rules as well? Yes, I have been commissioned to do the Vasen solo rules. I'm writing them right now. And all I can probably say is that they won't look anything like this. I don't have the same constraints that I had for this one, mainly because this is so close to Twilight 2000, it made sense to have them tied together. Vasen is a completely different beast, and therefore I have a very different brief from Free League, and I have a lot more freedom in how I'm approaching it. So yeah, but it's also a very, very challenging design project, because solo mysteries are not easy to do. But yeah, I'm kind of right in the middle of that right now. Tony, what is the one thing you wish you could have added or were forced to cut due to constraints? Oh, I think I think it's probably the mishap tables. I didn't actually cut them, but I really wanted to put them in. And I left them out initially. I did my first draft. I said this at the beginning of the video for those of you who didn't listen. When I finished my very first draft, before I sent it to anyone, just for myself, I was double the word limit that that Free League had set. And I hadn't done any of the mishap tables for that. So, yeah, they weren't going in. I knew they weren't going to be going in, but I think from all the other stuff that I cut, a lot of the cutting was tidying up the words, like doing a lot of self-editing just to try and bring the word count down. But yeah, I really, really think expanded mishap tables would be very useful, not just for solo play, but also for GM'd play. But when you're playing solo, I think that could be really good. And the way I would handle it actually is I wouldn't have these long... Like, if you look at the mishap tables in the player's handbook, the mishaps are like a paragraph of text. Some of them have multiple sentences, right? And the way I would do it is I would keep it Oracle focused, and they would be keywords, or they would be, it wouldn't be telling you exactly what happens, and here's the effect it has. It would be, this is the mishap that occurs. And the guidance would be, play it narratively. Roll where, add a penalty when it makes sense. Require a roll if that makes sense, or whatever. Like, turn it into a little mini scene, right? And that way I could come up with quite a big table of mishaps without needing to write these very specific types of things that are happening for every single entry. Pedro Juan, any plans on Foundry support for these rules? There are Foundry, the Kickstarter for the Book of Beasts that this is included in, unlocked a stretch goal for Foundry support, but that was before the solo rules were even included as a stretch goal. Nobody knows. I don't know. The Foundry dev as of yesterday also didn't know if that was going to be a thing or not. So I don't know, unfortunately. It would be cool if they... I mean, I've put a lot of these myself into Foundry because I did my playtesting in Foundry for this, and that basically was I put all of these oracles into Foundry so that I could just, at a click of a macro, I could do the yes-no oracle, I could do the theme oracle, all the rest of it. Yeah. Lots of mishap discussion there. River travel. Attila's big on river travel. Yeah. Yeah, it's not really in the book. There isn't really a lot. There's a section on sea travel. There isn't really a section on river travel. I don't personally think there's a lot needed there, but yeah, Attila does. I treat rivers as a body, like a highway that needs to be traversed, or an obstacle that needs to be overcome to get to the other side. So I don't really... I mean, I haven't really used them a lot in my games, I guess. Or if I come across a river, they're there for a short period of time, and then they're out of the way again. But there are a lot of rivers on the Forbidden Lands, and it could be interesting to have an expansion that deals with them. I just probably, with all the other stuff I want to write, it's not something I feel that passionately about. I probably wouldn't do it. So until that's one place for you to make a little bit of money on the workshop, maybe. Yeah, Fenhorn, solo mystery game, that's a challenge. Yep. Tony, solo Blade Runner rules. Nope, it's not going to be happening. Blade Runner is probably not going to have workshop support, although that's not been officially confirmed. It was strongly hinted at when I interviewed Thomas about it and asked him the question. And they are not doing solo rules. This was in the FAQ for their Kickstarter, just because I mean, I haven't actually looked at the Blade Runner book yet because I've not wanted to distract myself from prepping for this video today. But yeah, it's not really written in a way that you can do it solo, I guess. So I'm not doing them anyway. And it doesn't sound like anybody can officially do them because there might not be any workshop support. I mean, if there is workshop support eventually, I imagine Peter is going to be doing another solo supplement for them like he does for all of his games, for all the games that he kind of works on. So we'll see what he comes up with there. But I don't know. We'll see. Robin, are there Coriolis solo rules in the pipeline? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure if Coriolis is getting a Kickstarter in the future. I don't think Mercy of the Icons 3 is getting a Kickstarter, but I think there might have been talk about another Coriolis supplement that might be doing a Kickstarter. I might be mixing this up with something else, maybe Ad Astra or something else. I don't know. Honestly, if there are any other Kickstarters coming out for any Free League games, especially Year Zero Engine games, I would imagine there would be a stretch goal for solo play because there's been a lot of demand for them, especially since the pandemic has started. And Free League seem to be open to doing them. So Coriolis absolutely could do solo play, no dramas at all. There is already a solo set of rules by Peter, who did Forbidden Hero for Coriolis. It wouldn't. I mean, what if I was to be contacted by Free League to do a set of solo rules for Coriolis? I would probably try and make it card based like here, although I might use the the icon deck. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know, but there's not been any talk about it. I don't know if it's going to be happening. If it was going to happen, it would be almost certainly be a stretch goal on a Kickstarter for a Coriolis product, and I don't know if there are any planned. And yeah, PV, greetings from Brazil. Hi. Love your videos. Greetings from Brazil. Cool. So that sounds like the question's done. We're at the 1.5 hour mark. That's a good length. I don't really want to go too much longer than this anyway. So thanks everyone for the questions. Hopefully that was interesting for people to have a little bit of a view behind the scenes, behind the curtain on how these things come to pass. My thinking behind how these things got created and the tables and things. And yeah, I guess the thing I really like most about this, I think I'm most proud of, is this theme oracle. Really just because, I mean, it's nothing new. I didn't come up with the idea of a theme oracle. There's one in Twilight 2000. I've played Ironsworn quite a bit, so I'm very used to the idea of these sorts of things where you've got like themes and actions or whatever. I can't even remember what they're called right now. I'm getting mixed up with Starforged all the time and Strider mode. But the idea of there being oracles that you consult to get like a random word that you have to tie in, like improvise as to what that means in the situation. It's amazing. I really love it. I have Rory's story cubes. I have a ton of story cubes. I do this with my son a lot, and I recommend if you have kids, especially young kids, get some story cubes and play like a story game with your kids. Basically, the way I do it is my son will roll. I told him roll 3 dice. He always wants to roll more, so 3 or more dice. Whatever comes up, I have to look at those dice, and I've got like a minute before he really starts pestering me. I can't even think. Where I have to tie these 3 dice, like the pictures on the dice together, and make a story for him. And I tell him then a story, and that's like we did that a lot. Not so much now that he's older. He just wants to do everything Star Wars, unfortunately. But yeah, before, like, just really zany stories to come up with. It's a really, really great exercise at improvisation. It really helps with solo play. And these theme oracles are just more of the same, right? You've got a one-word prompt, and you've got to think about what that means in the situation. And yeah, I really love them. And I think there was a big challenge here with just having one oracle for this rather than having when you have multiple ones, the more words you have, the more you're like adding to the soup, so to speak, the easier it becomes for you as a player to make connections, right? If you've only got one word, it's a little bit harder. So that was always a challenge, but I'm quite proud of what I come up with here, not only because of the tie to the tarot, to tarot divination, but also in playtesting as well. It kind of worked quite well in most situations. So yeah, you can always add additional oracles from your favorite solo game. You could use, for example, the GM Apprentice deck, which is a really nice deck of cards that I also really like, that has like oracles and all sorts of stuff on them on a single card, if you wanted to add a little bit of variety. And Forbidden Lands is generic fantasy enough that you could use a ton of content from a ton of different games, and it would kind of work relatively seamlessly here. Cool. So I think I'm just gonna have a quick look at the last of the chat here. Raldanash is ordering a deck of Acer playing cards for this right now. Cool. And he also uses a story dice in school for language, for foreign language. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Speaking of Acer dice, cards, I mean. I'm not gonna find it. I have a deck of Viking themed playing cards for another one of my projects, which is Nord Saga, which is kind of like a Nordic Viking game that's on hold right now. Anyway, that's me. Thank you very much for watching. I won't take any more of your time. I have episode 2 of the One Ring campaign ready to go. There's just a couple more things that need to happen in editing, so that's probably going to come out. That was originally planned to come out today, but just because I recorded it a bit late, just due to some family stuff that came up, and editing just took a little while, it's going to probably come out on the weekend. So look forward to... I hope you're looking forward to that. It's a really, really fun solo campaign I'm running with the One Ring. There's only one episode. That's previous video to this one is the first episode in that. If you haven't watched already, I highly recommend watching it because it's a lot of fun. And episode 2, I don't want to spoil anything, but my God, oh God, things aren't going well for my poor hero. Yeah, so I'll leave you with that. Thanks very much, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.